No child could possibly know that he was trapped in this ghetto deliberately by people he'd never seen and who'd never seen. And I loathed it because I couldn't get out. And I knew I couldn't get out. Everywhere. Everything was falling down and going to pieces. And no one cared. And it spelled out to me with brutal clarity and in every possible way that I was a human being. You don't accept it because it is literally unacceptable. Those who have accepted it are all, without exception, dead. Either they are criminals, which is one way to die, or they're junkies, or they're drunkards, or they're like my father was, fanatically self-righteous and cruel. He was the son of a slave. It looked to me like masks I'd seen of African tribal chieftains, with one and barbaric mementos, standing on piers. He was always at the mercy of some other man who was always white. He had no power, and everything had failed him. The church had failed him. My father was a deacon of the church. And I remember how the voices rang and the music swept on like fire. There is no music like that music. No drama like the drama of the saints rejoicing, the sinners moaning, the tambourines racing, and all those voices coming together and crying holy unto the Lord. But for my father, there was much more to the church than this. The church for him was almost literally a way of getting back at white people. He had God, and God would judge them, and God would punish them. He wanted to kill them. He couldn't kill them, so he hoped that God would, and he hoped that all his life. And that also is what had been going on behind those walls. And that is what I saw in church. The police are perfectly aware of this dark need for vengeance. That is what makes them so brutal. They were brutal the night they stopped me, 2 of them. I had done nothing, and they frisked me, and taunted me, and said ugly things about me and my family. Then they knocked me down, and I wished I'd had a machine gun to kill them. And you begin to hate, and you are changed into an enraged human being. And in that ghetto, I was tormented. I felt caged like an animal. I wanted to escape. I felt if I did not get out, I would slowly strangle. I wanted school to save me from Harlem, but I knew it couldn't. terribly overcrowded then. So it was even physically impossible to get an education. I remember you wore a white shirt to school to prove again that you were not a nigger. I knew I was black, of course, but I also knew I was smart. I didn't know how I would use my mind, or even if I could, but that was the only thing. And I was going to get whatever I wanted that way, and I was going to get my revenge that way. School where I watched the streets, because part of the answer was there. Part of the answer was in Dickens and in Dostoevsky, too. I went to the 135th Street Library at least 3 or 4 times a week. And I read everything there. I mean, every single book in the library. I read books like they were some weird kind of food. I was looking in books for a bigger world than the world in which I lived, in some blind and instinctive way. I knew that what was happening in those books was also happening all around me. And I was trying to make a connection between the books and the life I saw and the life I lived. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive or who had ever been alive. And later, the agony was to translate it, to translate the life that I knew to a page and to give it back. By the time I was 14, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote all the time. I wrote at first on paper bags. I wrote plays and poetry and stories. And writing was my great consolation. My father said that I was the ugliest child he'd ever seen. He told me that all his life. And I believed him, that nobody would ever love me. But, you know, nobody cares what a writer looks like. I could write to be 80 and be as grotesque as a dwarf, and it wouldn't matter. For me, writing was an act of love. It was an attempt not to get the world's attention. It was just an attempt to be loved. It seemed a way to save myself and to save my family. It came out of despair. And it seemed the only way to another world. I remember the first time I went to the theater. A white school teacher had taken an interest in me, and she brought me there. And when I saw a real play on a real stage, it meant something. It opened something for me. I began to see that the world in which I lived was not the only world there was. The world she showed me seemed very far away, but it was real. It was there. So then it seemed that maybe it was not entirely impossible for me to reach out to that world. Maybe I could write something after all. A play. A real play. Real people would act in it. And there would be applause. I knew there was something I wanted in the theater. And I knew it had something to do with a fantasy that I had over and over as a child. I imagined I had a big Buick car, and I was driving it. Gray suit, and coming from someplace downtown. And I drive up my block, and everyone would notice me, waiting for me. And they'd all be very proud, for they're rich and famous. And then we'd all leave Harlem in this car. And we'd go into the country, and I'd buy them a big dinner, or take them to my big house, and we'd all be friends. That car would take me out of the ghetto, to take me into the big white world. I'd gone downtown when I was very young, my brother and myself, to sell shopping bags. I knew it was different there. You know, it was elegant and rich, unimaginable. Everybody there was white. They were all white. And although I couldn't put it together, I knew it meant danger. There was something downtown which menaced me, and I couldn't possibly live there. I could not live in the white world. But I couldn't live in Harlem either. I was icily determined never to make peace with the ghetto. I would die and go to hell before I would let any white man spit on me, before I would accept my place in this republic. And so I paused. I hung in limbo. I did not know precisely where I belonged or what I was. And this, in part, is what is happening in all those barbershop parlors in Harlem. People trying to be more white, or more black, or more something. My hair was always being attacked with hard brushes, and combs, and Vaseline, because it was shameful to have nappy hair. My legs and arms and face were always being greased so that I would not look ashy in the wintertime. I was always being mercilessly scrubbed and polished as though in a hope that the stain could be washed away. And yet, it was clear that none of this effort would release me from the stigma and danger of being a Negro. This effort merely increased the shame and rage. I had the choice either of acting just like a nigger or of not acting just like a nigger, and only those who have tried it know how it is to tell the difference. There was not, no matter where I turned, any acceptable image of myself, no proof of my existence. I did not have any human identity. My father was almost murdered by this problem because, you see, he could not encourage me or help me find myself. He was cold. He was distant. I knew, as a child knows, that he did not like me. I remember the despair and the loneliness it brought. I felt alone and betrayed. I yearned for my father. He was, I know, now, a black man, and he was being emasculated every day by white people. And he was terribly proud, and he could not feed his children, and this is why he was always in a rage and so unapproachable. But this knowledge did not come until much, much later, and it did not soften my pain. One night, my father did not come home from work on time. I went to the subway station at 135th Street, Lenox Avenue. I went downstairs. He was sitting on a bench, all by himself. And I walked over to him, and, well, he couldn't get up. But I made him stand up. And he had to lean on me. And I took him out. Anyway, that was the beginning of his illness. The illness which, killed him, finally. The day of my father's funeral had also been my 19th birthday. My father had lived and died in an intolerable spirit. It frightened me to realize how powerful and overflowing this bitterness could be. Realize that this bitterness now was mine. I was forced to admit something which I'd always hidden from myself. That I hated and feared white people. This did not mean the black people. On the contrary, I despised them and the ghetto from which they could never escape. In effect, I hated and feared the world. And this meant that I gave the world an altogether murderous power over me. This intimation made my heart heavy. And now that my father was dead, I wished that he was beside me so that I could search his face for the answers which only the future would give me now.